Hey y'all, my name is Glenn Wills. I do a little project called Forgotten Alabama. Now, I was supposed to be there in person today, or at least sometime this month. I actually don't even remember what the date was, but well, things have changed a little bit, and so Sharon asked me if I would do something virtually so y'all could at least watch it online, and I agreed to that. So let me explain a little bit about what Forgotten Alabama is about. Many years ago, I started to notice, the things that, the old abandoned structures you drive by and you see every single day on the side of the road. And it occurred to me that one of these days, all these things are going to be gone. So I decided, probably close to a decade ago, that I was going to go out and document as many of these as I could while they still existed. In my time on the road, I've been all 67 counties multiple times. I've driven probably around 60,000 miles by now and taken around 45,000 photographs. I have a Facebook page about, my adventures, not really my adventures, about everybody's adventures, a Facebook page called Forgotten Alabama, where people actually post things from near where they live. And we recently passed 200,000 people on the page. We are the largest page of this type in the entire country. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of, everybody who's also, sees what I see and goes out and documents that that they see anywhere near them, so that we can have a lasting memory of these things while they still exist. Anyway, without just getting into the program here, since this is a much more abbreviated version, I'm going to skip over some of the parts I would normally go to and just pretty much go to the program itself and show y'all some things that I've actually seen while I've been out on the road. When I first started doing Forgotten Alabama seriously, I was literally getting up and getting in my truck and driving and seeing what I could see. And it quickly dawned on me it was going to take me the rest of my life to do it that way. So I decided I need to come up with a plan. Alabama's not a huge state, but it's a good-sized medium state. It's still over 52,000 square miles. And I needed an organized way to do this. So what I did was, in the summer of 2013, I sat down at my computer and I came up with a semblance of an organized way to do this. I broke the state up into 16 roughly equal sections, and then I'd pull up Google satellite maps and I'd start scanning every mile of every state and every federal highway in the entire state of Alabama. And to give you a perfect example of how I did it was, as I'm looking for things that would catch my eye. I'm actually not normally this high up in the air, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at. I got really good at this. It's like finding things that would catch my eye. Like, this is obviously a huge thing. Those of y'all who've been around a while obviously know this is an old drive-in. Every time I would find anything interesting, I would go down to ground level. It's called Street View, and if that was available. And if I thought it was cool, then I'd come back out. I'd put a pin in the map, and I'd obviously identify it. And then I'd pull back out a little bit, and I'd start scanning down the road a little bit more. And one thing wound up becoming 10 things, and those 10 things became 100 things. And keep in mind, I've been working at this off and on for years, so there's literally hundreds of hours worth of work invested in this. But ultimately, I wound up finding somewhere in the neighborhood of around 2,500, 2,800 different places I could go. I haven't shot all of these, but I've probably driven by at least 95% of them at one time or another. People also post things on the page that I didn't know about, and I also put a pin in the map and see if I can get to it at another time. Now, over in Cherokee County, this is the old Jordan Gin. As y'all know, Alabama is the cotton state. In 1849, Alabama produced 49% of the nation's cotton crop. And the United States was the world's leading producer of cotton. Then the war came along. The Yankees blockaded the ports, drove the price of cotton from, I think it was 13 cents a pound up to over $1 a pound. You could get rich if you could get your cotton out. The problem is you couldn't really get it out. But ultimately, it got to the point where Southern governors were telling farmers to quit growing cotton. We can't eat cotton. That was the start of the demise of cotton in Alabama. After that, you had Reconstruction, the weather, you had issues getting fertilizer. In the early 20th century, you had to contend with the boll weevil. All these things contributed to the demise of cotton in Alabama to the point where it forced farmers to diversify into other row crops such as corn, soybeans, and peanuts. And now Alabama doesn't even do a tenth of what number one Texas does. Over in Talladega County, it's a significant part of Alabama history that few people actually know ever even existed. This is one of the last remaining remnants of the Alabama Army Ammunition Plant. It was built in 1941. It was specifically built to make munitions, explosive powders, for World War II. At its height, it had around 25,000 people working there and was producing 40 million pounds of ammunition a month. Towards the latter part of the war, it was also involved in the production of heavy water, which was used for the atomic bomb. After the war was over, the plant was eventually shut down in August of 1945. They tried leasing out some of the former buildings there for, manufacturing, industrial, commercial purposes and things like that. It came to be discovered the ground was heavily contaminated from production of all these munitions to the point where it actually wound up becoming an EPA Superfund site. Over in Perry County, just north of Marion, it's just a little roadside park. I used to see these everywhere when I was growing up. It was literally nothing more than like a handful of concrete tables and some trash cans, and that was pretty much it. But when I was growing up, this is your fast food restaurant. When we take trips to the beach, I grew up in Huntsville, so it was 10 or 11 hours to go all the way to Gulf Shores. And what would happen is my mom would pack a lunch, you drive 4 or 5 hours, and we'd stop at one of these little things, and it gave me a half-hour break or so from being in the back seat with an annoying little brother. Now there's a McDonald's on every corner. State doesn't even maintain these anymore. In fact, I actually was back up looking for the same place this past winter, and I couldn't find it, but I did find out where it was. In fact, everything was gone. Everything vanished. That dead tree you see right behind the table there, it was literally laying on the ground. Over in Coosa County, this is one of 3 former casket factories. At one time, casket manufacturing was a big part of the economic base in Goodwater. So much so they used to have casket festivals and casket races. Eventually, steel became proven to be a cheaper material to manufacture with, and all of these went out of business. It was also a railroad interchange, and the railroads changed the way they did things. And what all this meant is it wound up just killing off the town completely to the point where it's just a shell of what it used to be. I saw this over and over and over again in Alabama. Another perfect example here is this is Tucker's Pharmacy. This is in downtown Camp Hill, which is in Tallapoosa County. At one time, that road over the right there, that used to be to US 280. That was a major route from Birmingham to Auburn. And like I said, it used to go right through town. Then at some point, probably about 35, 40 years ago, the state rerouted the road to the edge of town, so you no longer went through town, and the businesses started to suffer. Then the state again decided they were going to 4-lane 280, so they moved it even further away to the point where you wouldn't even know Camp Hill existed were it not for a sign on the highway. Tucker's Pharmacy was kind of the social center of town. They had a soda fountain. This is where the cadets, picked up the bus to go home. And Camp Hill is just almost completely a ghost town. It's really sad to see. Up in Jackson County, way up north Alabama, this is a foundation for the old Southern Railway Depot. It doesn't look like much now, but on March 25th, 1931, this is 2 years after the Depression has started, a year and a half after. Everybody's out of work. They're destitute. They're poor. The only way you got anywhere was to ride the freight train. Up near Chattanooga, a bunch of black kids and a bunch of white kids got in kind of a scuffle, in order for the black kids to get away, they managed to hop onto a boxcar and head west down into Alabama. Well, the white kids didn't take too kindly to that, so they decided they were going to get a hold of the Jackson County Sheriff and see about, doing something about that. So the sheriff got a posse up. He went down and stopped the train in Paint Rock, made everybody get off, and turns out one of those boxcars was 2 white women and these 9 black kids. Well, the white women knew they were going to be in trouble, so what they did was they turned around and accused these black kids of rape, and they wound up becoming the famous Scottsboro Boys. Down in Faunsdale, this is actually in Marengo County. I actually went down there to go shoot the old water tower there. It's over 100 years old, all rusty, and it was really cool looking. Well, while I was there, I noticed this tiny little structure behind it. I wondered what it was. So I went and stuck my head in the door. It's like, oh, cool, it's a jail. So I crawled all the way on the back of this bunk here to get, this really cool shot of, being down the hole. And by the way, you're looking at the entire jail. This is it, just one cell. If anybody ever asks me if I've ever been in jail, I can say, well, technically, yes. Over in Henry County, just west of Abbeville, this is Rosa Parks' childhood home. She actually was born in Montgomery, if I remember correctly, but she grew up here. I was actually going to do the library in Abbeville 3 years ago, and as I was passing this, I noticed it was so grown up you couldn't even hardly see it from the highway. When I got there, I asked the guy at the library what the deal was, and he says, well, it sits on private land, and the owner doesn't want to sell. But apparently, he also doesn't have any money, so he can't keep it up. I went back and checked on it probably about a year and a half ago, and it's boarded up now, but still in worse condition than the last time I saw it. Over in Lee County, I used to ask people to take a guess what this was. And I asked them, what's the creepiest thing you could think of? And, they come up with all their great, what they thought it was. And I finally tell them, it's a funeral home. It's Ward's funeral home. And it was just this perfect creepy setting for, a shot of a funeral home. He was in business for many years. He eventually passed on. His son is also in the mortuary business. The city of Opelika wanted him to do some improvements, and he didn't want to spend the money. So rather than fooling with it, he just relocated his business just outside the city limits, so the city no longer had jurisdiction over him. Eventually, the old funeral home continued to deteriorate, and it's my understanding that it's been torn down now, so this doesn't even exist anymore. All right, got a little question for you here. Sharon at the library asked me to pick something that people would have to guess where or what it is. So I thought, well, this would be a perfect example because this is something that actually still exists. I'll give you a couple clues here. It's in North Alabama. And it was actually designed by a very well-known architect who also designed many of the older buildings at the University of Alabama campus. So what you need to do is when they post this is you need to put your answer in the comments there, and whoever the first one to actually figure out what it is apparently will win a free book. Over in Lee County, just outside of Opelika, is what's last remaining remnant of Camp Opelika. This, it's not much to look at when you find out. This is actually, to the best of my knowledge, this is actually some administrative offices at Camp Opelika, which was a World War II prisoner of war camp. It was mostly German and Italian prisoners. After the war was over, it turned into campus housing, for students and things like that, off-campus housing, obviously. Eventually, it just became low-income housing. Then they tore down pretty much everything except this building and another one. I actually went by to see if I could reshoot this a year and a half ago when I was working on my third book, and it turns out they've also torn this down, so it also no longer exists. Down in Baldwin County, this is the keel of the merchant schooner Rachel. She was uncovered by a tropical storm probably about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years ago. And, it was all over the news of like, this really cool sailing ship, it's just been, the shipwreck. And people started, all these crazy stories about what they thought it was, the origin of it or anything like that. And obviously, they wanted to make it sound sexy, like it was a commerce raider. And it was like, no, it was just, a commerce schooner. It was the seagoing equivalent of a tractor trailer. Back in 1923, the Rachel was running lumber back and forth between Alabama and Cuba when it got caught in a tropical storm. And what happened is it wound up getting beached, but it survived intact. I mean, the boat was okay. The boat's owner tried to get every tugboat he could find to try and tow it back into the Gulf. None of this was successful. He eventually had to abandon it. He stripped it of everything that was, worth salvaging and walked away from it. Somebody else came and burned the Rachel to the ground, presumably to salvage the iron nails. Time, the weather, and tourists picking off little pieces of it have not been kind to her. I figure she's probably going to completely disappear in the next 3 or 4 years. Down in Escambia County, I was actually at the library in Atmore, and the lady with the newspaper asked me if I wanted to go see a rolling jail, and it's like, well, duh. So we had out this salvage yard on the edge of town, and what this is a rolling jail. It was built by the Dalton Steel Company, Manley Steel Company out of Dalton, Georgia. This was late 19th century or early 20th century. What it was used for is to hold convicts. They would take them out and, to work the road gangs. And at the end of the day, they would all spend the night here. And it's kind of like, well, an RV for convicts, I guess, for lack of a better term. I never knew such a thing existed, and it's the only one I've ever seen in my entire life. Over in North Montgomery, y'all might be aware of Zelda Road. That's actually the daughter of a former Supreme Court Justice for the Confederacy, and she also was married to F. Scott Fitzgerald. Well, this is a street obelisk, and what that is literally a concrete post that sat in an intersection, and this is what they used to use for street signs, back 100 years ago. And obviously, when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is a very familiar road to anybody in Montgomery, because if you're going up I-85, you're actually obviously going to cross Zelda Road. There were several of them here, and it was like, I was just, wow, this is such a cool find here. And, it's a little heavy. Otherwise, I would have taken it home. Okay, I'm kidding. I don't ever take anything. But it was a really cool thing to find. Over in Shelby County, is the old Shelby Hotel. This is actually not the old Shelby Hotel. This is the newer Shelby Hotel. The old Shelby Hotel was built in 1863, served as a hospital for the Confederacy. It burned in 1898. They rebuilt it as the one you see here. It's said to be the very first hotel in the entire state of Alabama that had both running water and electricity. It was very well known in the area. Sadly, probably about a year ago, it also burned to the ground due to mysterious circumstances. Arson was suspected because there's obviously no power to it. But to date, I have yet to hear if anybody has actually been arrested for that. Down in Baldwin County, in Bayou La Batre, is let's put it this way. Everybody, when this thing first showed up back in the 1990s, everybody thought it was a captured Russian spy submarine, and Soviet spy submarine. And it's like, well, okay, partially yes, partially no. It was Soviet, and actually, to be honest with you, it was built during the Cold War, sometime between 1968 and 1972. But that's where it ends. Nope. This is just a research vessel. It's called the Sever Bis II. It has a sister ship called the Sever Bis. And literally, they were used for oceanographic research, inspecting fisheries and the like. Apparently, some enterprising American found it rusting away in a shipyard in the Soviet Union, bought it, brought it back here. The story was is he was going to use, fix it up and use it for undersea tours of the Gulf of Mexico. Sometime in the 1990s, he told the folks at the Steiner shipyard, where it now sits, in fact, as you can still drive by and see it today, he was going out of town on a business trip, and nobody has ever seen or heard of him ever since. Over in Talladega County, this is the old Waldo Covered Bridge. It's the second oldest covered bridge in Alabama, and the oldest abandoned covered bridge. In fact, it's the only one that I'm aware of that's abandoned. It was built in 1853, sometime in 1858, my bad. Sometime during the war, the Straits Raiders actually used this to go from one place to the next while they were trashing and burning their way through Alabama. After the war was over, it actually wound up just going back and becoming a regular road till sometime in the 1960s when the state shut it down because they deemed it unsafe. There's talk of preserving it, but so far, nothing has come of it. It's still in remarkably good shape given how old it is, but it's obviously not going to last forever. In Covington County, I was on my way to a little town called Red Level, and I happened to just be passing by this. I didn't even know this little farmhouse existed, and it was like, I'm not one to pass up something really cool, so I turned around and made sure I got some shots of it. It's another perfect example of why I'm glad I do what I do, because probably about 3 or 4 years ago, somebody actually posted a picture of this place on my Forgotten Alabama Facebook page. It had been gotten struck by lightning and burned totally to the ground. In northern Autauga County, a little town called Billingsley, the first thing, remember I'm using satellite maps, and I happened to notice this was the first town I noticed that had the name of the town emblazoned on the roof of a large structure, and I thought, wow, what kind of an ego does this town have? Well, as it turns out, these are actually significant. These are known as airway markings. And what that was is back in the 1930s, the Department of Commerce set up the Airways Marking Commission. And the purpose was to paint the name of the town on the largest structure in town, in every town in the country. And why, you may ask? So pilots would have an idea of where they were going. I mean, they could literally lean out and they'd say, they're going over a town, and they know which way to turn to go, from one place to the next. This continued through World War II up to a point where towns on the eastern seaboard actually had to paint over the roofs to make it difficult for Germans and their super duper long range bombers to figure out where they are. After the war was over, the practice was abandoned, and because radar was very common, and it was abandoned in the late 1940s. I've probably seen, if I had to guess, probably around a dozen of these that still exist. Typically, they're painted on the roofs of cotton gins. Oh, and this structure also no longer exists. Over in, where am I? I'm north of Greenville, probably about 30 miles north of Greenville, just off Highway 31. This is a caboose of the Western Railway of Alabama. Why it was out here in the woods is just beyond me. It was just a mystery, and it's something I will never ever know. All I know is you're literally driving down the highway and you see woods, and you see more woods, and you see an open place, and you see woods, and then you see a caboose, and then you see more woods, and it's like, that's how it was. So anyway, probably about 6 months, I'm glad I went down there when I did, because probably about 6 months after I took this shot, a friend of mine that lives down in Lower Alabama says, that caboose is gone. I said, gone? How could it be gone? I mean, the thing weighs 20 tons. There's no wheels on it. It's not like you can go in there and tow it out. It remained a mystery for probably about another 2 or 3 months till he found out what happened to it. This caboose and a wooden caboose were bought at an estate auction and moved down to a cattle farm in Crenshaw County. And their intent was that they were going to fix up both of these cabooses. They finally decided they didn't want to fool both of them, so they decided they were just going to fix up the wood one. The lady, I've actually talked to the lady who owns a steel caboose, and she actually tried to sell it to me for $1,800, which that actually wasn't a bad price for it. But then there's also the sticky little details. Are probably about $10,000 shipping and handling. Over east of Montgomery, what I like to call the road, in fact, it's east of Shorter, is what I like to call the road to oblivion. And, it just had this really cool Twilight Zone feel about it. What it actually is, and I believe it's called the Old Montgomery Highway. This is what used to be US 80. This bridge is probably easily in the neighborhood of around 100 years old. But if you get there at the right time of the year, with the leaves scattered all over the road and, no leaves on the trees and all like that, it's got this really creepy feel about it. And it was just like something, oh man, I was so grateful I managed to get a shot of this. It's just well worth seeing. The actual US Highway 80 is probably about 100 yards to the right of this shot. Up in northwestern Madison County is the Urquhart House. This is the very first room that was built there. Urquhart was a Scottish immigrant. I believe he moved down to Alabama from Virginia, and he started off building a one-room cabin. He wound up actually adding on to it as the years progressed. He actually did this in 1813. This is 6 years before Alabama became a state. This is the third oldest structure in Alabama, and the oldest abandoned structure in Alabama. So that was really a cool thing to be inside something, as historic as this. Back when I was a teenager, a little bit of trivia here, I used to hang out with my friends out on this guy's farm up in northwestern Madison County. And they had this cool old house there, and that's where we all hung out. We went camping there and the like. It turns out that this is the exact same house from when I was a teenager. So I always thought, wow, talk about, it was like I was destined to do Forgotten Alabama. Up in Arkadelphia, Arkadelphia was founded in 1820. It was originally part of Blount County. In 1850, the state redrew the county lines, making Arkadelphia part of Blount County. In 1854, they established a post office. It was also a stagecoach stop from the road from Tuscaloosa to Huntsville. And then in 1901, the state once again redrew the county lines, making it part of Coleman County. So it had kind of the unique position of being in three separate counties during its existence. That's the post office there on the left. I used to ask people when I was in front of a live audience, take a guess what the building on the right was. And of course, it's so obscure that nobody would ever get it. So rather than, waste y'all's time, that is the old movie theater. And finally, down in Sumter County is Kotopa Presbyterian Church. There are two things I absolutely love to shoot. Old abandoned structures, obviously, and the Milky Way. Problem is, you can't see the Milky Way in the dead of winter. It's just where we are in the solar system and our path around the sun. You can see it great in the dead of summer, but by then everything's all really grown up and it's hard to see stuff. So what you got to do is split the difference. I left my house at 2 a.m., drove 2 hours to get down here. It was 4 o'clock when I got here. It was middle of April in 2018. It was about 45 degrees. Everything was soaking wet. I was miserable. But I stayed out here an hour, got my shots, got my truck, got home about 7 a.m. I was so tired that I decided, I'm just going to go to bed. When I finally got up and started looking at my photographs, it was like, oh, dang, look at that. There's a meteor. I had no idea I had this shot until I started looking at these photos. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I'm going to leave y'all with some, parting thoughts, I suppose you could call them. I would say normally to a live audience when you go home, but most of y'all are already home or, at work or wherever you're watching this. Look around at the things you see every single day when you're out and about. When you go to the bank, you go to Walmart, you go to your church, whatever. 100 years from now, almost none of this stuff will exist. So take pictures of everything, because you never know when you took the last photograph of something before it actually vanished. You go back and look at an old black and white photograph from 50 years ago, and it's just really fascinating to see this thing. But 50 years ago when that photograph was taken, it was probably a pretty mundane subject. Finally, if you are not familiar with my Facebook group, it's facebook.com groups Forgotten Alabama 1819. And also, if you do the Instagram thing, you can you can check me out there. My handle there is Forgotten Alabama 1819. Anyway, that's pretty much it. I hope y'all have a better understanding of what it is exactly I do. I do love what I do. I'm always looking forward to winter. I only shoot in the winter, and I hate winter. Trust me, I hate being cold. But I do love shooting, and the best time to shoot is obviously in the dead of winter when there's no leaves and no kudzu and things like that. If you're interested in copies of my book, all you have to do is go to ForgottenAlabama.com. And, that's my first book right there. This is my second book, the much anticipated sequel for more Forgotten Alabama. And obviously, my pride and joy, 200 Years of Forgotten Alabama. This actually came out last year. It was in celebration of the bicentennial. All you have to do is go to ForgottenAlabama.com. I have specials on, combinations of whichever books you want. And I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, you can join the Facebook group, and you can follow me on Instagram if you're curious. I'm Forgotten Alabama 1819. I appreciate y'all joining me. It's been fun, and I look forward to many more years of doing this. Y'all stay safe, and have a great day.